That was a little bit intense, so I hope we can still be friends.
Now what? That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Should we start at a level of abstraction like, you wrote of Baldwin's precipitous eloquence. And no one here in this audience wouldn't have been touched by your own eloquence in that brilliant reading. So can I just ask you, what are you going for when you write?
Thank you.
For example, I was thinking that little phrase you had, which is a wonderful phrase, like injecting a contrast dye, into this thing of news, whatever it was. Yeah?
Well, I think of eloquence as maybe the preconditions out of which the work begins. You don't go into the work to try to find eloquence in it. You approach with a certain eloquence, and then you actually try to pull back from that, so that the challenge becomes finding the words that fit the occasion, but expunging anything that is superfluous, anything that is merely performative. I think there was something about this particular essay where, you're sorry, the light's a little bit bright. This is not my regular life, if you can't believe it. You're reading someone like James Baldwin, and there is a kind of contagion of his prose. He's a writer of such immense flair that I think it ended up pushing this particular essay a little bit in that direction. And very often I'm actually a little bit happier toning down the fireworks a little bit. But in general, the difference between the first draft and the 12th draft is that the 12th draft is more precise and less eloquent.
That's a good answer.
Are you going to do that all night?
The way in which the American public discovered you was
I like that. It makes me feel like a rare element. I feel like tantalum.
Are you going to do that all night?
I might.
Was through the beauty of Open City. And you were pleased by the fact that James Wood, in his wonderful review in the New Yorker, which I remember saying to you was not a review, it was a song. He noted the influence of Enigma of Arrival, Naipaul's Enigma of Arrival. Now, when Naipaul was given the Nobel Prize, the citation had this line that I want to read to you and then ask you to tell me a little bit about what is the different thing that you might be doing in Open City. So the citation said, in his masterpiece, The Enigma of Arrival, Naipaul visits the reality of England like an anthropologist studying some hitherto unexplored native tribe deep in the jungle. With apparently short-sighted and random observations, he creates an unrelenting image of the placid collapse of the old colonial ruling culture and the demise of European neighborhoods. What sort of enigma of arrival are you describing in Open City?
It was interesting that Wood mentioned that in his review because very few other sort of critics,
no one else mentioned.
Yeah, nobody else mentioned, so that, and it was a book that was a little bit about the content, but the rhythm of that book,
yes.
the prose rhythms of it were something I sort of had in my ear a bit while writing mine. I mean, I have always sort of liked the school of writing that is based on the idea of a Martian visiting Earth. Over-describe, act as if we've never seen it before. And especially when you're approaching a subject like New York City that has an entire library full of books written about it. You cannot make a bid for originality. What you can try to do is testify to where you are and where you're beginning. And so I think I surrendered any great bid for originality or brilliance. And in that book, I just wanted to make it feel testimonial. I've created this fictional character. His name is Julius, and he's given a testimony of a year of his life in the city. That's all. Just almost as if somebody's saying, well, so Julius, tell me, what has the past year in the city been like for you? And by the way, we've never heard of New York City. And so he describes the streets, he describes the buildings, he describes those sensations that we've all observed 1,001 times, but that maybe because they're so obvious, are not so often set down in writing. And I just found through doing that, there was like accumulation and accumulative drift that then became its own texture. And that's what the book was. So the gift of being a stranger everywhere is something I have learned not just from Naipaul's work, but from all the writers I admire.
They are?
Amitava Kumar, for example, in an early book that I adored called Bombay, London, New York. In each of these places manages just to give a kind of vivid not-at-homeness that he conveys in the stories he tells about moving through them. Language that is ferociously intelligent without being academic. And people who wrote and thought like that became my ideal, and I think it's also true of a lot of the work of John Berger, whom we both admire very much. And several other writers from which we get it. But the ability to always be surprised by where you are is a particular clan within the broad church of writing. And that's the one to which you're a member and I'm an associate, but my file is up for review. So. But that's where I want to be, the perpetual stranger. Yeah.
I think I'm trying to look for something that I hope I find very quickly. Berger is calling something.
No.
Teju just mentioned that he admires these writers, Berger or Sebald, others that we can think about. But what I personally find very attractive about Teju's writing is that he's not simply doing what they do, he's actively rewriting them from his place. And so for those folks who have been living away from, let's say, the world of Twitter, I just want to have Teju give you a little taste of how he, in a series of 7 tweets, rewrote the first lines of classic novels.
We're going to do this?
Yeah. Do you mind reading from here?
No.
And then it goes on the next one.
Mrs. Dalloway said she would buy the flowers herself. Pity. A signature strike leveled the florist. Call me Ishmael. I was a young man of military age. I was immolated at my wedding. My parents are inconsolable. I was never aware of the humor in these, but this is a peculiarly dark crowd. Stately, plump Buck Mulligan came from the stairhead bearing a bowl of lather. A bomb whistled in. Blood on the walls, fire from heaven. I am an invisible man. My name is unknown. My loves are a mystery. But an unmanned aerial vehicle from a secret location has come for me. I don't... Someone must have slandered Joseph K. For one morning, without having done anything truly wrong, he was killed by predator drone. Okonkwo was well known throughout the 9 villages and even beyond. His torso was found, not his head. Mother died today. The program saves American lives.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are you guys going to discuss this with your therapist later this week? He was telling the most horrible stories, and I was just laughing.
Why did he quit Twitter?
It got noisy.
Yeah.
But also, it was good. It was a good space. We did some work on there, and there was conversations with people. And never let the last good thing you did be your enemy. It's very important to me. Just quit. Just go. I didn't want people to say, oh, remember when he used to be good at Twitter? So I used Twitter as a very creative space, and after a while, good. Let's do something else. And I started doing the
Instagram.
No. I mean, I took the photography critic gig after Twitter.
Yes.
You can't find time for everything. So.
I hereby appeal to all of Teju Cole's 190,000 followers to follow me instead. I'm also
That's right.
Teju is also on Instagram, doing some very interesting stuff. And for folks who are interested in checking that out, I'd encourage you to do that. Because people were laughing. Let's make it a little serious. In your review of a wonderful book, Wave, by Sonali Darengala, you quote her where she says, writing is a much better quality of agony than trying to forget. Writing is a much better quality of agony than trying to forget. What do you think that means for her? What is it, and what does writing mean for you? Can I lead you there? Writing is a much better quality of agony.
I think it was Robert Frost. Somebody asked him to explain what a poem is, and he said, do you want me to say it worse? If I say it different from that, I'll say it worse. Writing is a much better quality of agony than trying to forget. Yeah. Right? I mean, it can restore something to you. It still hurts. What happened with this woman?
Yeah, tell the story if you don't mind.
We all have our nightmares. And what happened to her was the ultimate nightmare. Because one December morning, about a decade ago, she is an academic who lives in the UK, and she'd gone on vacation. And the water came in. It was the morning of the tsunami, and she was in Sri Lanka. Her parents lived there, but she'd come over from the UK with her family, with her husband and her 2 sons, 8 and 6. And so in the course of one morning, she lost the boys and her husband and her father and her mother and her best friend. And this book, Wave, is about her barely surviving that grief. It is one of the most pained and intense books that I know. And writing it was a way for her to move ever so slightly closer to life. Because then she could describe the meals that they made together, and the drives in the countryside, and the boys in the back seat acting up, and gross out humor, and their fascinations. And her husband, they dated since they were 19 years old. And just bring them all a little bit closer into the light. Most of us, almost none of us, will ever approach a limit case like that in our lives. But what the limit case does is that it tells us that writing, what is written down, what James Salter says, only those things that are written down have any possibility of being remembered. That it has a peculiar restorative power. One afternoon in County Clare, and it would have vanished, beautiful as it was, for all time. But Heaney writes it down in the exact words that the experience deserves, and now it is preserved for all ages to come. Only writing can accomplish such a miracle.
I think you're a narrator in Open City because he has a quality of observation. Going into a museum, seeing pictures, seeing a peculiar stillness about them, and remembering that the painter was himself deaf, and the subjects he was painting were deaf children. Because of that quality of observation. Or other things that the novel offers, for example, the birds flying into the Statue of Liberty and dying. Those are indelible images. They also offer testimony, you know. They are offering us testimony about, for example, the black slaves, their graves over which some of New York was built, etc. So I was thinking that, or that essay that you just read to us, parts of which certainly left us breathless. You're also registering pain and doing something else with it. What is that something else? I mean, how do you think about, like, okay, what am I doing? What are you doing?
I mean, certainly I just heard my mother's voice. What are you doing? What do you think you're doing? I mean, you definitely go in there with a commitment, a loyalty to the disregarded things of the world. That's for sure. You know. And that's a clan that's related to this other clan I talked about. Those of us who want to see things out of the corner of our eye.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
The little things, the small things, the little moment, not the big story, but the small story.
Yeah.
Now, in any particular situation, you have to be patient, you pay attention, and then you see what small moment that will give to you. In home products, for example, you have that scene, you know, where the narrator goes on a set. Everybody else will be fascinated by what Bollywood is doing, the star, their lives, and all of this. And what you had was a set piece about the guard and the dog and the guards and their banter, their lives. The dog is going to come back as a hero if he's good in this life. And that is how I wish to write. I want to step back and see what else might be going on. I don't object to Open City being described as a 9/11 novel. It is. It's just my idea of what 9/11 is about, which is that it is 9/11, the aftermath of that event, contains an infinity of tiny moments that are worth preserving. deeply private, deeply personal. Everybody who's moving through the city is living inside a hush and a stillness. When Virginia Woolf writes about a moth bashing itself against the window, struggling to get out, at that very moment, people are dying in their thousands on the Somme. It's during World War I. The moth becomes a testament to an observed moment that can draw us into a peculiar sympathy we might not have anticipated. War movies don't do anything for me, really. But if somebody can find a moment of human feeling, human intensity, I love the pregnant moment before something happens. I love the long aftermath and how that is dealt with. Mm-hmm. And for that reason, I am drawn to the poets of aftermath and the writers of solitude and those who know how to evoke insomnia.
Yeah.
You know, the moments of pure existential isolation. A space opens up suddenly inside you and it's like a chasm. And then something can happen. You know, when a writer says, no hurry, we're in this space together and something's going to happen. And isn't that what we try to do? I mean...
Yeah. In your case, there's one thing that and I'm glad to have this opportunity to talk about this. I also think what you're doing is, in the same way as you talking about Black Lives Matter, paid attention to the dancers, which, you know, instead of fulminating about the more obvious thing about people being killed, here you were talking about the persecution of the wild black body. Not only that what has not been paid attention to is something that draws your eye, I also think that unlike many others, you allow the reader to or your viewer to cultivate doubt. Mm-hmm. There is a risk, there are many things that you're not uncertain about, but it's also a space for cultivating ambivalence, doubt. And I wonder where
I'm really glad you picked up on that little section of it, because James Baldwin is pretty much a secular saint now. I think, as far as the people I'm talking to, the stuff I see cited, the stuff I read, in terms of public American life, especially when you're thinking about race and condition of the country. I think after Martin Luther King Jr., he's the most cited person. He's got a quote to fit every situation. I mean, James Baldwin becomes the way you get, girls these days, or boys, more apropos. Like, he quoted James Baldwin, I guess he's hot to trot, let's do it. See you on Saturday, Love the Baldwin quote. So there's nothing controversial about me writing a deep and warmly appreciative piece about James Baldwin. There's nothing controversial about saying Black Lives Matter unless you're dealing with psychopaths. I know there are a few. But, when I'm writing a piece like that, I think it's important for me to say, look, we're in this space and we do have to do a little bit of thinking. I cannot simply be a performing crowd pleaser and just tell you exactly what you think you know and what you want to know already. I had people take me to task for saying that I disagree with Baldwin about, museums and whatever, the cathedral and all of that. It's almost as if nobody's allowed to actually have a point of view, Somebody said to me that, you would not like Shakespeare if you really understood what black pain was about. Like, are you fucking kidding me? Really? Seriously? And And I think those forms of dissent are so important, little as they might be. And it's funny that in a piece like that, it's the dancers on the train that are the most controversial part. Because in fact, most people I know don't like them. People of any color, they're like, they're annoying. And I want to say, well, you know what? No. Slow down, stop, and think about what's at stake. It's not about you all the time. And I think I do live in a little bit of fear of becoming excessively conciliatory. I have my enthusiasms and I write about them, and I become this guy who writes about what he loves. And every now and again, you do actually have to, this is a very mild case, but every now and again, you have to just stick the knife in and say, well, no, I actually stand for this, and I will not be bullied into thinking.
Okay, let's stick the knife in. Who was it?
I feel like I'm about to get into trouble.
Was it Wolf Blitzer? Who was it on CNN who said, is Ebola the ISIS of?
They're all idiots.
Okay, no. A few lines. Just tell them a little bit about what did you hear, and then read a few lines from it.
Okay.
Because this is about being unafraid to go over the top, and it's, I think, so it's...
I wrote a little piece for the New Yorker's online site when the Ebola hysteria went out of control. And there was a sort of a chyron on CNN that said, could Ebola be the ISIS of biological agents? Just asking. Hashtag. Just saying. Some have said, and I had had enough of that shit, so I wrote this piece. Is Ebola the ISIS of biological agents? Is Ebola the Boko Haram of AIDS? Is Ebola the Al-Shabaab of dengue fever? Some say Ebola is the Milosevic of West Nile virus. Others say Ebola is the Ku Klux Klan of paper cuts. It's obvious that Ebola is the flight MH370 of flight MH17. But at some point, the question must be asked whether Ebola isn't also the Narendra Modi of sleeping sickness. And I don't mean to offend anyone's sensitivities, but there's more and more reason to believe that Ebola is the Sani Abacha of having some trouble peeing. At first, there was understandably the suspicion that Ebola was the Hitler of apartheid. But now it has become abundantly clear that Ebola is actually the George W. Bush of being forced to listen to someone's podcast. The World Health Organization calls it the Putin of Stalin. In layperson's terms, that's like saying it's the Stalin of U2. Now we're seeing the idea thrown around that it could be the Black Hand of the Black Death, not to mention the Red Peril of the Red Plague. And it goes on.
No, you have to finish it, man. You have to read the whole thing. We're enjoying it.
If you don't want to go that far, you have to at least admit that Ebola is the Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb of stage 4 brain cancer. At this point, it's very possible that Ebola could become airborne and turn into the Tea Party of extreme climate events. Throughout the country of Africa, Ebola is the Abu Ghraib of think pieces. Look, I'm not the politically correct type, so I'm just going to put this out there. Ebola is the neo-Nazism of niggling knee injuries. The kind of threat it poses to the American way of life essentially makes it the North Korea of peanut allergies. I'm not going to lie to you, and I don't care what color you are. You could be red, green, blue, purple, whatever. You need to understand that Ebola, the Obama of Osama, but don't quote me, is literally some of my best friends are black, of not all men. But the burning question no one has raised yet is whether Ebola is the Newsweek of halitosis. We'll get to the phones in a moment and get your take on this. But first, let me open up the discussion to our panel and ask whether Ebola is merely the Fox News of explosive incontinence, or whether the situation is much worse than that, and Ebola is, in fact, the CNN of CNN. There you go. Thanks.
That's great.
You know, pieces like that are a real problem because, I write an essay, I slave over it for 6 weeks, get every word right, go through it. I wrote that on a 1-hour-long flight. And I got off the plane and I called my editor. I said, I have this piece. Please say no, I'm embarrassed. And she said, of course we're going to publish that. Are you crazy? So it's always the things that you... And they're going to say, he died and he was the one who wrote the Ebola piece.
It's coming out in the new essay collection also, by the way. Well, that's the thing. You should have said yes to me when I asked you to have a drink this evening because you were working hard on that other piece that you have to.
Yeah.
Which brings me to the question about what you're doing these days in terms of writing for the New York Times Magazine. There's that line of Fondace about the novel being like a camera walking down the street. Do you remember that line?
Yes.
Yeah. You've always been like that.
I'm like a camera walking down a street.
1,000 cameras, a camera with 1,000 eyes.
The lyrics in this guy, it's just...
And so perhaps you could share with us.
I don't know what happened with photography. It just became almost like a convenient analogy for all the things that interest me. And then I went very deep into doing photography and writing about it. The magic in photos remains irreducible. I would not have thought I had 12 long essays in me over the course of a year. Apparently I do. The power of the fear of a deadline is an amazing thing. And over this next year, I have to produce another 12. It's just interesting. It's quite challenging for me. I don't think I've had anything quite so formal or serious to do before for an audience of that size. But what I've had to learn to do is be productive in hotel rooms. I'm traveling, I'm doing other things, and the piece has to be filed, and I have to get on the phone, over the connection, the Wi-Fi has to work with my editor, and, there are people like him saying, meet me for a drink, and I have to be a nerd and be like, I'm sorry, piece has to get in, but,
No, work is important.
Thank you. Thank you for your permission. And then what's also worth saying here is that I'm not, and I'll speak for us collectively, I don't think we're on stage here because we're more worthy or more interesting, or you're more worthy and more interesting. I'm not worthy or more interesting than anybody in the audience. We are all perfect contemporaries. We all live life with the same density of experience and with the same texture of aliveness. And I think anybody over there could be over here and speak interestingly about their experience of life, and I would want to listen to it. What I find is that I need to be responsible to the various opportunities I have to pursue a wide range of interests and actually have that be what I do for a living. And that's why I want to do all of it, almost to the point of fatigue, because not doing it would feel like spurning the opportunity that's been given to me. My God, I know people who would love to write novels and write about photography and hang out in the nice places in Santa Fe and talk to audiences and but they have to earn a living in another way, and there's no additional time to do it. So you get the chance to do it. Don't fuck it up. That's a little thing I'm trying to live up to. Yeah.
There's an aphoristic clarity about that last statement, which which sort of forbids any further inquiry. Don't fuck it up. Thank you so much.